Understanding precious metals is easy. Maybe not that easy. The basics are easy, but there's a lot of things that make it more complicated. So today, I'm going to talk about the gold to silver ratio. What that simply is it's how much silver you can buy for the same amount of gold. So usually this is measured in ounces. It could be measured in grams, kilos, tals, tolas. So to make it simple, let's say the ratio is 50-1. For the same amount of currency, you could buy 50 ounces of silver or 1 ounce of gold. If the ratio was 100-1, you could buy 100 grams of silver for the same amount of currency as you could buy 1 gram of gold. Now, the ratio does not take premiums into account, and that's going to become important later. Historically, the ratio was important for coins when gold and silver were monetary metals. It was the metal that our coinage was made out of. So you had to have the right ratio, otherwise one coin would have too much metal in it or not enough metal in it, which could lead to either the coins being hoarded or the coins being avoided. This is part of the problem of bimetallism. We actually saw this in the Latin Monetary Union. When the Union was first formed, the ratio of silver to gold was set. However, more silver was discovered, there were new mines, and so silver became cheaper, and the coins no longer reflected the reality of the market. So for this reason, ratios are, as often as they can be, fixed by governments. The earliest example we have of this is from Egypt in 3200 before Common Era, when it was set to 2.5-1. Going to the Romans, we know that in 210 BCE, they set the ratio as 8-1. In 46 BCE, under Julius Caesar, he set it as 11.5-1. And then not long after, Augustus changed it to 11.75-1. Around this time period, it was common for the range to be between 6-12-1. Many Middle Eastern and Asian nations had a tighter ratio historically because they valued gold more. And at this time, because trade was difficult and things were further apart, it was easier for nations and areas to have their own ratio. If we go to the 17th century, things have changed a little bit. There's a lot more trade, the world is more interconnected, and so for this reason, most nations' gold to silver ratios are pretty much the same. There might be a little bit of difference here and a little bit of difference there. And from the end of the 17th century to pretty much the end of the 19th century, the ratio was generally somewhere around 16-1. In 1792 in the United States, it was 15-1. It was 15.1-1 in France. But the United States changed this in 1834, going to 16-1. Also at this time, most people believed there was about 17 times more silver in the ground than gold. We now usually put that estimate as about 19 times. Starting in the end of the 19th century, more and more nations moved away from bimetallism to a gold standard. So instead of your money being denominated in silver and gold with a fixed ratio, it was just denominated in gold. So silver was generally left to the market price. The market determines the value of the silver. Governments are no longer setting a ratio. Instead, they're oftentimes setting how much of their currency you need to buy a certain amount of gold. Or I guess the other way you could look at it is 1 unit of their currency is equal to how much gold. So moving forward, the silver part would move up and down with market value, and generally the gold was fixed or semi-fixed by governments. This continued in one form or another all the way up until the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement when Nixon closed the gold window. Now, both metals are completely based on market price. So, what should the ratio be? Well, here's the thing. It doesn't really have a ratio that it should be at. Now, some people will point at the 16 to 1 or something near that ratio that gold to silver had for a large part of history. The problem with that is it's ignoring that those ratios were created by governments who were using both gold and silver as monetary metals. It was the metal in your coin. Some people might be tempted to point at some ratio or a band of ratios when monetary systems were either gold-backed or the Bretton Woods system. But once again, the gold was fixed and highly influenced by governments who were once again using it as the backing of their money, and silver was the one that was at a market value, where the market created the value. Unless precious metals like gold and silver are remonetized, then you're unlikely to see a very flat ratio ever again. How to use the gold to silver ratio. The ratio is mostly used among traders as an indicator of what metal to buy or what metal to sell. So let's do the physical version of this first. This would be trading metals to get more metals. The goal is not to end up with the most currency in metals. It's not to end up with the most dollars or euros or yen or Swiss francs. It's just to end up with the most metal. So let's do an example. Let's say that the ratio is 100 to 1. Which would be considered high. So, trader might take an ounce of gold and trade it for 100 ounces of silver. And then let's say that the ratio contracts. Let's say it goes to 75 to 1. Well, then the trader could trade those 100 ounces of silver to get 1 1/3 ounce of gold. Or if it went down to 50, to get 2 ounces of gold. So the focus here is on getting the most metal. Now, this is almost theoretical, though, because there's lots of issues here. Taxes, depending on your countries, premiums, also liquidity. Can you find somebody that's willing to trade you 100 1-ounce silver coins for your 1 1-ounce gold coin? Ignoring taxes and ignoring liquidity, the biggest problem is premiums. The gold to silver ratio does not take premiums into account at all. It's based upon the paper market. And premiums are not equal across all pieces of bullion. The gold to silver ratio has a lot more use in the paper markets. In future markets, the ratio gets used to decide what contracts to buy and what contracts to sell. Of course, if you're going to wade into the futures market, understand there's lots of leverage. That can work really good for you when you do things right, or you can blow up your account really quickly. Gold to silver ratio is also used in some ETF strategies. The simple one is to buy the appropriate ETF when the ratio reaches a high or low point. And then when the ratio is reversed, you sell the previous ETF and you buy the other ETF. The other option is you hold both ETFs and you add to your position in the appropriate ETF when the ratio goes one way or another. If the ratio is high, you add silver. If the ratio is low, you add to the gold ETF. The gold to silver ratio is also used in options trading, generally in some type of spread. So if the ratio is high, well, it puts on gold, it calls on silver. If the ratio is low, then calls on gold, puts on silver. It's similar to futures trading, but takes less cash and limits your risk. The other one that you'll hear a little bit of this is in commodity pools. So commodity pools are a lot like ETFs where you buy into the pool. However, it's easier to take physical delivery if you want the physical gold or physical silver at the end. This is not dissimilar to gold savings accounts that you'll see in some countries. I'm going to use Taiwan as an example because I lived in Taiwan and I'm most familiar with it. You could buy in your account gold. You bought it by the gram. And then eventually, if you wanted to and you had enough gold, you could take physical delivery of it. Same idea. For stackers of physical metals, the gold to silver ratio is not really important day to day. In fact, you could argue that you could probably pretty safely ignore it. It could give us an idea of where a deal is to be made in relative value of gold versus silver. However, at the end of the day, your own budget and your own strategy is more important than the gold to silver ratio. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. Thank you for giving me a thumbs up. Thank you for subscribing. So, I'd like it if we could all go down to the comment section. Tell me what you think about the gold to silver ratio. Do you use it as part of your stacking strategy? I personally don't. I'll look at it sometimes to see if we're at an extreme, but it doesn't really affect my decisions about what to stack and when to stack. But I want to hear your thoughts. Do you use it? Do you ignore it? Is it more just kind of an interesting, oh, that's neat? Tell me down in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.